Welcome to this KCI Excel Advanced tutorial. This is the third of a three-part series of Excel training videos, and by the end of this tutorial, you will dazzle your coworkers and maybe even yourself with your superior Excel skills. Your friends may think you're a bit of a nerd, but we think you're awesome. Depending on your experience and familiarity with Excel, you may be jumping right to this advanced tutorial or joining us after reviewing the KCI Excel tutorial for intermediates. In this advanced tutorial, we'll review the following topics. Take a look at some more formulas, custom conditional formatting rules, pivot tables, transposing data, and protecting cells. Let's get started by reviewing these functions in the context of a sample event housing spreadsheet. After graduating from the sum formula, we're going to move to some other helpful formulas for counting and calculating data. Let's start with an easy subtraction formula. In our housing example, we want to display how many nights each of the guests will be staying. Since we have all of the check-in and check-out dates recorded, we can use the subtraction formula to calculate the number of nights required. In cell P3, we will enter the formula equals O3 minus N3. When we hit enter, we see that this guest requires a room for 4 nights. We can then copy this formula and drag it to apply to the other rows to display all of the guests' required night stay. In some instances, we need to add or count values in cells that don't contain actual numerical values. In these instances, we can use the COUNTIF formula. You'll notice on our housing spreadsheet that we've denoted the guest stays for each day by placing an X in the column of the day of the week that the guest has been booked to stay. To calculate the total booked for each day at the first hotel, we'll use the COUNTIF formula. Clicking G5 to activate the total booked cell for Sunday, we'll type the formula equals COUNTIF bracket G3 colon G4 to denote our range, and then we'll tell Excel what we want it to count in the brackets, and in this case, how many X's appear. We hit enter, and then we can copy this formula and apply it to the remaining days. We can then do the same for the other hotels by applying the same COUNTIF formula and specifying the range to include. Total booked. Select our range. We can even drag to select the range, and then we tell it that we want it to count the number of times the X appears. Enter, Control C, Control V, and last time, the X, enter, copy, and enter. In the summary charts at the bottom of our worksheet, we want to quickly show how many remaining suites and rooms we have left to book from what we initially contracted. To calculate the used suites, we'll take the total book values from both Premier Central Park and Run of House to give us our total suites. In cell B45, we'll enter the following formula to calculate this for us. Equals G $5 plus G $25. The dollar sign before the row number tells Excel that this is an absolute value and not a relative one. Relative values will change when we copy and paste a formula relative to where they are being copied. Absolute values will always reference that location. Now that we have totals for how many suites are used and how many suites were contracted, we can calculate how many we have remaining. This will be very helpful as a snapshot glance when monitoring progress and reviewing with our stakeholders. To calculate the remaining suites we have left to book, we'll activate cell D45 and input the formula equals C45 minus B45. This tells us we're using 2 rooms, and since we've only contracted 1 for Sunday night, we have -1 remaining. Using a custom conditional formatting rule in our remaining column can highlight potential warning areas and quickly alert us to areas that need attention and may need to be resolved. In this example, we'll create a custom conditional formatting rule that highlights the cells in yellow when we have more rooms booked than we initially contracted. We'll click on cell D45 and select Conditional Formatting from the Home menu ribbon bar. We'll select Highlight Cells Rules, less than, input the value of 0, since we want to show whenever we have a remaining value that's less than 0. We'll click on the drop-down, select Custom Format, and we'll tell it that we want it to fill the cell in yellow when this condition is met. Our cell is now highlighted since we do in fact have more suites booked on Sunday than we initially contracted. Pivot tables are extremely helpful when trying to analyze data. This interactive report allows you to literally turn the table. You can easily move or pivot selected rows and columns to organize the data in different ways, view different summaries, make comparisons, and detect trends. In our housing worksheet, we want to quickly extract and compare how many of our guests are coming from each country, as well as how many guests are entitled to all charges to master or room and tax or pay on their own. To see just this info summarized in a dynamic table that allows us to quickly reorganize views, we'll create a pivot table. First, we'll highlight the cells that we want to include, ensuring that the country, charges, and quantity columns are definitely selected. We have others included as well that provide the option for even more sorting and views of our data relative to each other. We'll ensure that the Insert tab is selected, and we'll click on Pivot Table. Once we've confirmed that the range is correct to include and the location of the pivot table, we've selected here, we're going to put it on an actual new worksheet so that it doesn't get confused with what we're doing on this worksheet. And we'll click OK. Now we need to check off the fields that we want to include. In this case, we're going to check off country, charges, and quantity. And down below, we can drag fields to show different customizations of the data. We move quantity over to the values to give us a count, and we can now see a snapshot of how many guests are coming from each country, along with a further breakdown of how the charges should be handled. If we were to move charges above country, we can see that our pivot table has instantly pivoted to now show our breakdown by charges with a further breakdown of those charges by country. If we wanted to show this report in relation to the various companies represented, we can go even further and back to our pivot table field, list, and select company. We now have a very interactive dynamic report that we can refer back to on the separate sheet within our workbook. Another way we can reorganize our data to show a different view is by using the Transpose feature. Down in our summary chart for suite nights, we can show the data presented in a different view. We'll highlight the chart, click Copy. Down in cell A62, we'll right-click, select Paste Special, and check off the Transpose box. Now our data is displayed with the days of the week as column headers and the used, contracted, and remaining headers as rows. There may be times when we want to protect the data and formulas within a specific spreadsheet to ensure the integrity of the data. If the files will be shared with others or the data is extremely sensitive and critical, you can designate what others are allowed to update or change by protecting parts of the sheet, the entire sheet, or even the entire workbook. In our housing example, we're particularly interested in protecting our summary charts at the bottom of our sheet. We'll start by unlocking everything else in our sheet. Select the entire sheet by clicking on the upper left corner of the row and column intersection. Once the entire sheet is highlighted, we'll right-click, select Format Cells, and select the Protection tab and uncheck the Locked option. Click OK. Now we're going to just highlight our summary charts. Same thing, right-click, Format Cells, and check Locked. Now, as the message conveys, this action has no effect until we protect the worksheet. So we'll go ahead, click OK, and click on the Review tab. Here we find the Protect Sheet, and we're going to first off uncheck the option that allows users of this worksheet to select locked cells. We don't want them to do that. We can further protect this by adding a password that needs to be required to unprotect the sheet. In this instance, we're going to use admin. When we click OK, we're prompted to re-enter our password to proceed. And now you'll notice whenever I try and click in the summary charts, I'm unable to do so, but I am able to click anywhere else within the worksheet. Well, do you feel smarter? We've covered some pretty advanced, useful functions and features of Excel that should help with your data management and provide you with great new tools to organize, format, and convey your data to others. Congratulations on completing these KCI Excel tutorials, and remember to review them as often as you need for a refresher.